Welcome to Taking Back Our Food. This event is being recorded. The recording will be available on our YouTube channel in 1 to 2 weeks. This event is part of Whidbey Reads, an annual community reading event. Whidbey Reads is funded through generous donations from the Whidbey Community Foundation, the Clinton, Langley, Freeland, Coopville, and Oak Harbor Friends of the Library groups, and is supported by the Snow Isle Libraries Foundation. Our 2023 selection is The Music of Bees by Eileen Garvin. Contact your local community library to request a copy. Visit our website for bonus resources and information about additional Whidbey Reads programs. Your mics are muted. Use chat to ask questions at any time during the program. Questions will be answered following the formal presentation. We will use chat on our end to share links to relevant resources. Vicki Robin is a prolific social innovator, writer, and speaker. She is co-author with Joe Dominguez of the international bestseller and classic, Your Money or Your Life, Transforming Your Relationship with Money and Achieving Financial Independence, and author of Blessing the Hands That Feed Us, Lessons from a 10-Mile Diet. She is co-founder of Conversation Cafes and of the 10-Day Local Food Challenge, and hosts the podcast YouTube interview series, What Could Possibly Go Right?, inviting cultural scouts to shine a light on what's emerging as the pandemic, climate, economy, and polarization unravel the old normal. Vicki serves on the board of the Post-Carbon Institute. Welcome, Vicki.
Here I am, and I am going to share my screen so that, hold on a second. There we go. So we're just going to
Perfect.
Would people put in the chat where they are watching this from, what part of the island you're on or county, where in the county you are? I'm curious about that. And yeah, I don't see anything in the chat yet, but in Langley, yeah. So I'm curious about whether we have people from the whole island, from the North Island, because my information comes from my experience of living in Langley and doing my local food challenge in Langley. So here we are. This is Taking Back Our Food, building an abundant local food system in the Pacific Northwest. And this is just going to be a cruise, just get in our little electric cars and cruise around our island and see what is here in our local food system. So here's a little roadmap for this presentation. I'm going to tell something of my story, how I came to this, and probably some background you might know is that I've been involved in sustainability for 30 years now, trying to help create systems that are more sustainable over the long haul. And so this fits into my sustainability work. We're going to go over what is local food. When you say the word local food, everybody thinks of that pretty picture of the farmers markets, but it's a lot more than that. And then I'm going to go over why local is important. And we might all give lip service to that local is important. Of course, we really like it. We like our food and farmers, but there's a lot more to it than that. And I'm not trying to convince you that you should eat a certain percentage of your food locally, but I just want you to know what choice we're making. It's much deeper than just the carrot or the beet when we eat local food. And then what's a food system? We don't think so much about the system. We think about the particular outlets, the grocery store or the farmer's market that we go to. But a food system, we need to have, if we're going to have really delicious and abundant local food, we need a system of processing the food and delivery of the food. And I will say that since I wrote my book in 2014, it was published in 2014, our food system has integrated more. And that's one of the exciting things for me in preparing the show. And then I'm going to present about our local food system and then what we, the eaters, can do to grow our local food system, and then something about the 10-Day Local Food Challenge. So in September of 2010, I took on to do a 10-mile diet. This is the book that produced from that experiment. I had a friend who was a farmer who wanted to see if she could actually feed somebody for a month. And I volunteered. And so I made the commitment, September 2010, I would eat only food grown within 10 miles of my home. And I gave myself a little latitude. I said that, wait a second, there's certain things I must have. Like I just have to have salt, which I later learned I could actually distill from our waters. I need caffeine, I'm not going to suffer. I need lemons and I need oil, and I couldn't find any local oil. So I gave myself 4 exotics that I was allowed to have, and the rest had to come from my region. And every day I blogged about it. I started a blog and it was an audience of 1 because I just wanted to record what was happening. And by the end of the month, I had a following, and then I had a book contract. So here I am standing in Langley, and these are the places where I got my food from on my 10-mile diet. So there's a lot that I learned from doing this experiment. And that's one thing about doing an experiment, whatever it is, whatever you're curious about, to give yourself a period of time. It's just like what we do with eating or with exercise. Give yourself a period of time so that you can see, you see yourself in relationship to the challenge. And so one of the things I discovered is that why it's hard to make the local food shift is that, number one, it's the time it takes to cook from scratch. There's no packaged products, in my 10 miles. So you discover that, every day you have to cook from what you have, not from the recipe that, you got out of a great Mediterranean diet cookbook. You have to cook from what you have. And everything comes in fresh, so you have to chop it. And then, it's a lot of prep time. And so that's one of the features of this. And you could call it a benefit, because we're actually learning to cook from scratch. That's a wonderful thing to be able to do, and to be in relationship with the food. The second thing was the price. And I had my sort of shocking moment when I found somebody who produces local chickens, and I went to buy a chicken, and I found out that it was probably twice as much as the chickens I can get in the store. But it also is, it was grown by real people. It's like when you think behind the chickens that we get in the supermarket, it's not a pretty picture. None of us want to look at it, about the long hen houses and the cages and the sickness and the farm workers who have to deal with that, and the slaughter. None of us want to think about it. We just want to go get a packaged chicken. But when I bought this local chicken, I realized these are real people in my community. So, and also what I discovered was, with these chickens, somehow or another, because it was more nutrient dense, I ate less, so there's a bunch of ways that you can think about price for price on the food. And then a third one was, I have this picture of Crunchy because I discovered that one of the issues for me during that month is that I'm a crunchaholic, that I like crunchy food. And they say that there's 2 types of people, crunchaholics and sweetaholics. So I just was missing that crunch that I could really solid crunch. And so I figured out how to dry zucchini. And so that it turned out to be, I called them zucchini crackers, or Zackers. And then I put honey on it, and it was Zookies. But it reflected back to me that I have habits and addictions around food, that food is not just something to nourish my body. I have rituals, I have things that I must have every day. And so that's, local food, making a local food shift disrupts that, so it makes you aware of what your patterns are. And if you enjoy self-awareness, it's really a fun game to see, where am I attached? And then, of course, there's convenience. And I told somebody that I was going to do a 10-mile diet in September. And she said, well, that's not a problem. You just go down to the grocery store and you can buy your food there. And so we don't realize that the grocery store is actually There's no food in a grocery store. There are only shelves. A grocery store is the endpoint of a global food system. And as we learned in the pandemic, it's like if for some reason some elements of that food system stop, those shelves are bare. And then there's also the thing with Amazon. And I know I'm not critiquing anybody for buying from Amazon, but it is true that our drift into this kind of convenience of being able to go online, order something 2 days later, it's at our door, is actually impacting the capacity of our local farmers and ranchers and food processors to make money, to make a living. So these are some of the things the barriers that I have found in myself. And also with the cooking, I just realized I can cook in batches. I don't have to I could cook a soup for the week. So with every single one of these things, if you have a commitment to eating local, you find your ways around it so that it actually is a value add to your life and not an inconvenience. So let's go on to what is local. And so sometimes local is expressed in food miles, like my diet was a 10-mile diet. And people often think of that it's a 100-mile diet. There's a book called Plenty that's about people who did a 100-mile diet. It's a very common idea to eat a 100-mile diet. Or you can think of it regionally, like I often think of it as Puget Sound or Western Washington, or the 5-county region around where we are. So you can think of it as regionally. And you can also think of it in terms of your state. I eat Washington grown food. And as a shopper, actually, you can pay attention to where the food is grown, and to watch out for that. They'll say distributed from XYZ place in Seattle, but that doesn't mean that it's actually from Washington State. But so these are just several ways that we determine, in terms of miles, what is local food. And then another way to determine it, and it's very much what people imagine, is that it's direct from the farmer to the consumer. There's no middleman. And that gives you the feeling of the relationship and the freshness and the right from the ground. And it also describes the marketplace, that there are, by you eating local, you're buying from the local farms, and you're creating prosperity. And I'll go over that more later. A third one is that it's grown ecologically. And what does that mean? That it means that, it's farming practices. It's the kind of, animal manure for fertility and green manure for fertility. It's the not tilling the soil deeply, but, just tilling it a little bit. It's non-toxic. It's not using pesticides, toxic pesticides. It's not using toxic fertilizers, nitrogen-based fertilizers. And it's about crop rotation. It's sort of handcrafted. It's handcrafted food rather than industrial food. And then there's a question of justice. And to realize that our local farmers are competing with a system that's bent, an international industrial food system that is bent by subsidies, lobbies, loss leaders. In other words, a lot of ways that large corporations drive out smaller producers from the market is that they can, for a period of time, reduce their costs so far that the local producer just has to quit. They go out of business. And exploitation of farm workers and of if it's livestock, of the animals. So there is a justice element in doing this, for those of us who really are attempting in good faith to have our lifestyles, everything about our lives, have a lower impact on, elements of the planet, whether it's our use of plastics, whether it's climate change. So just to think about that. So this is what local is. It's food miles. It's direct, farmer to consumer. it's farming practices, and it is getting out of the injustices of the global food system. And I wanted to mention that in the chat, while I'm going along, I'm just going to take a look at the chat. Yeah. Oh, somebody said, would it be safe to say that ecologically is close to organic? Yes, it would be safe to say that. But there are many farmers, there's like the organic designation, which, has particular criteria to it. And then there's organic practices that there's not that, I wouldn't say, I don't know what percentage of our farmers, but many of our farmers' food is organically grown, but it's not organically certified. And so, yeah, and I have a little acronym that when I was working on this, I used OWL, organic, whole, and local. So organic is one designation that creates a impression of value of your food. Whole, I mean, if you're thinking in the store, like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to have a fair and just and diet? And so you think, okay, so if it's organic, that's one criteria. We know that the land is being treated well, and then whole is like, if you're buying whole foods, not like the store Whole Foods, but whole foods. That is the less packaging. There's no packaging. There's all of those other elements. The apple is the apple, and local is the other designation. And that doesn't mean it doesn't mean that it's organically produced, but it just means that it's from the local system. Okay, thank you for that question. And just keep chatting. Yeah, keep chatting. I appreciate that. It's fun. Whoops, I'm going to go back here. I was trying to get rid of something there. So here is the scary slide about the global food system. And, we all eat from the global food system. Our lives, we don't produce cars locally, bicycles locally, roofing locally. We don't produce that much locally. So the global system undergirds our pleasant lifestyles. And it doesn't mean we're profligate or greedy or anything. It just means that we live in a global system. But it's good to know a little bit about that system. And so in terms of fossil fuels, that nitrogen fertilizer is made from fossil fuels. And then also the large machinery is burns a lot of gas. And they say in the USA, 400 gallons of oil equivalents are spent annually to feed each American. So, we don't realize how dependent we are on fossil fuels, which is a diminishing resource to produce our food. And the more that we depend on fossil fuel fertilizers to produce our food, the less the soil is actually developing, the rich, dense, tilth that of its own fertility. So not only are we using the fossil fuels, but we're degrading the soil as we do it. And then the inputs, the pesticides and herbicides, they say that every body alive today carries 700 plus contaminants from food, water, and packaging. And we know this here on Whidbey Island about that we have PFAS and PFOS in our aquifer. And then there's fertility loss. This is what I was saying. Since 1880, 50% of the heartland's topsoil has disappeared. So we are losing fertility. We are using up soil. They sometimes, some places, they say there's only X number of crops more that we can get off that soil because there's no nutrients being added back in. There's no organic material. There's no manure. So we're diminishing the capacities. We're using up the capacities of the soil. And then climate change, that agriculture, because of the fossil fuel in the nitrogen fertilizer, because of the transportation, the long transportation lines, because of the machinery, and then also because of the feedlots, 14% of greenhouse gas emissions come from industrial farming. And then I just added there, the war in Ukraine affects food insecurity around the world, that our global system is so tied to global geopolitics that it makes a certain fragility that we can't see, but it makes a difference. And then this little slide is about the number of planets. You know, the ecological footprint defines how much over budget we are in terms of the ecological capacity of our Earth. So that's the scary slide about the global food system. It's not to feel guilty or terrible or deny ourselves. It's just to, in a way, it increases our appreciation of what our local food system is providing for us, because it's getting us out of this one, and it's allowing us to express our values through the food we eat. So I just like this picture, just like I can't even figure it out, but you know, it just expresses the complexity of the global food system and all the linkages that have to work perfectly well for it to work. So this is a wonderful, wonderful graphic that was produced by Goosefoot on South Whidbey. And it just gives you a picture of the elements of our food system. And I'm going to talk us through this, because if there's any slide that's like essential, this is the one. So it reflects food producers, and it's not just vegetable or fruit farming. It's also the value-added product, you know, turning, you know, your tomatoes into a tomato sauce, or et cetera. And it's the ranchers. It's the chicken farms and the beef, goat, sheep. There's a wonderful farm on the north end of the island called Fakima Farm, where I buy my chickens every year, and they use a process called rotational grazing. They follow this carefully so that they rotate their animals through different pastures every day. They open and close fences, and they rotate the animals through the cows through. And then after the cows go through, they rotate the chickens through, and they eat the bugs from the cow patties, so that they're constantly getting fresh grass. And that is the best meat, the best chickens I've ever eaten. And so I'm very appreciative of our ranchers as well. Another element is where we can buy food. And I'm going to go over this more, but there's our farmers markets, our farm stands, our CSAs, and this wonderful hub that I'll go over more later. So there's all sorts of outlets to buy local food. And when I did my 10-mile diet, when I started that in 2010, it was not, there was not as much, there was not as many places to get local food. You really had to work to find what you wanted. And then there's the organizations that encourage farming and sort of basically use food and farming as a way to build wonderful humans as well. There's the Growing Veterans farm. I think it's up on Greenbank Farm, and what they do, they do produce, you know, food for sale, but they also, one of their main ideas is to overcome isolation for vets, you know, so they can actually get together, they can work together in the farm, they can have conversations. So it's a wonderful program. And then there's the Coopville Farm to School program, the South Whidbey School program. I'm going to talk about those a little bit more, and the Organic Farm School. So those are some of the institutions. And then there's ways in which we make sure that everybody on our island eats. Everybody has enough food. And there's the Gifts from the Heart Food Bank, the Good Cheer Food Bank and Farm. And you know, those are no questions asked. Everybody on this island could go through a period of time of hunger, and they might need to use the food bank. And so it's a wonderful, wonderful capacity there. And Island Senior Resources does the Meals on Wheels for people who are ill or isolated or homebound. And not only do they serve food, but they have, you know, somebody's coming to the home. and just a visitor can make a big difference in the day. The Northwest Whidbey Health House, Readiness to Learn on South Whidbey, and Whidbey Island Nourishes that make sure that there's prepared food for students who depend on food lunches, on school lunches, so that they make sure that people, the teenagers on our island and more, are fed. So that's the food insecurity nonprofits. And then we have the agricultural resources groups and affiliates. So there's a whole bunch of organizations that are creating the food system, that are maintaining and creating the food system. There's South Whidbey TILF, the campus is on Thompson Road. There's Whidbey Island Conservation District, and Whidbey Island Conservation District is about land management and forest management, as people are property owners. There's the Food Resiliency Consortium. It's people from all elements of the food system who meet regularly and share ideas and problems. The Whidbey Island Whidbey Island Growers Association, WSU Extension, Slow Food Whidbey, Northwest Agricultural Business Center, and Goosefoot Community Fund. So these are the institutions, the agricultural resource groups and affiliates, food insecurity nonprofits, the educating farmers and healthy eaters, marketing outlets, and food producers. And just take a second and just contemplate how wealthy we are in food and in caring people and in organizations and in producers, all of us focused on how can we have a thriving local food system. Also to say that the Agricultural Resources Committee is working on a larger, commercial kitchen, so more people can process their food into products. And they're working on cold storage. So basically, all of these are observing what's missing in our system and how can we add it. So take a second and enjoy that. Yeah, so next slide. Yeah, I put these beautiful slides together when I was publicizing my book. These are quotes from the book. And we need to break the hold of the corporate industrial food system, not only on our eating, but on our imagination about eating. And I think that's important to realize that our imagination has been diminished down to what's in the grocery store. What's for dinner? Go to the store. And we don't see all the other ways that we can acquire excellent food in our community. So here's I'm just going to go through this whole list of why local is important. So the first one is prosperity and jobs. I mean, the local food system is part of our local economy. And so we have farmers, we have farm hands, we have woofers and interns that come through. There's people who work, who have jobs on the school farms. So it produces, our local food system and our emphasis on local food produces prosperity and jobs for our community. Let's see. And another one is that it's really, you don't see it really, but you don't understand how the farmers market or the Whidbey Island Grown Cooperative, that makes a difference in let's see, excuse me, I'm sort of got myself in bollocks. Yeah, so I just want to say that $1 is spent locally. 48% of dollars spent locally in local businesses stay in the community. So you pay the farmer, and then the farmer can pay somebody else, for whatever they need for, let's see, feed for the animals. So that money, if you're paying a local farmer, that money stays in our community. So it increases our community health and vitality. And just for an example, when when I said I was interested in local food, somebody mentioned up in Oak Harbor, Applebee's. That's a local restaurant, and yes, it's on Whidbey Island, so it's local, but only the people who work there are actually putting any money back into our economy because they earn money and then they spend it probably in Oak Harbor. But the profits are going to corporate headquarters. And then, not to bang on Amazon too much, but our dollars spent in Amazon, all of them leave the island. So all our dollars leave the island. And it's important because it increases prosperity. Somebody will go to the flower shop, somebody will go to the bookstore, somebody will shop at the Star Store, somebody will go to a business and have a glass of wine. All of these dollars stay here. So, every little bit we do on this makes a difference in terms of not just food on the island, but the entire island economic system. And so another one is that we, with the Good Cheer Gardens and the Big Acre Garden, I'll mention that later, with all the ways, and then also people, I don't know if they still have the program called Grow a Row, but people grow in their home gardens and then they bring that food into the food bank. So there's a lot of really good food that goes into people who are hungry, who may not have money to go and buy it in the store. And so it's important, the more that we shop the system, the stronger the system gets. And local is important because it produces a sense of belonging. And this is something I call relational eating. It was a big insight I had when I did my 10-mile diet. And one day I was like standing in my garden and I realized, well, food isn't just in the grocery store, it's here in my garden. But it's not just in my garden. It's all around me. I'm just a limited animal that doesn't understand all my food sources, but I am an animal in a living world. This eating locally gives me more of a sense that I belong here. I am part of the earth. I'm part of the living world. I'm part of the forests and the waters and the farms. That I am not just on Whidbey Island, like perched on Whidbey Island, but I am of Whidbey Island. And that feeling of belonging here is a wonderful feeling. So this is another eating, I said about myself, became an act of belonging. And it's also about preserving farmland. And it's not like a direct correlate, but I will say that the increasing demand for local food, the popularity of it, the stronger the marketplace, landowners follow the money. They really do. So if they're going to produce a crop for export, or they're just going to have, horses on their land, and they start to see that if they converted part of their land to a market garden or to animals, or, raising chickens or whatever, they can see that they could use their land differently to produce food for our island. And so that demand makes farmland more valuable than development. There's a development that's in contention up in near Oak Harbor called Wrights Crossing, I think it is, and it's farmland. And the developer wants to come in and develop it. And there's a lot of resistance for a lot of reasons, but one could be that we'd lose more farmland. And every acre of farmland is lost. It's going to take a lot to bring it back. I have a little chat here. Alan Ammon says, I have a friend who fishes almost every day in season. He doesn't like fish, just fishing. So he donates his catch to Good Cheer for distribution through the food bank. Wow, that is such a great comment. Thank you. So better soil. This is another thing. It's like maybe many of you don't have this picture, but I didn't think of soil as having different qualities. I just thought of it as soil. It's like where the plant grows out of. But like soil is a complex set of relationships between microorganisms and minerals and roots, and it's a whole community that provides nutrients for the food that grows in it. So if you have diminished soil, you have less healthy food, less nutrient dense, less filling. Like as I said earlier about the chicken, when I ate that chicken that had been grown locally and so well and pastured, I eat less of it. I don't need as much to satisfy me. And we don't see that really, when we go to the store, everything looks so bright and shiny. We don't really understand that a green pepper grown locally and and organically with organic practices, and a green pepper grown commercially may not have, the same size, the same appearance. They may not have the same food value. And you can just think that industrial food is like sugar and local food is like an apple. Not that the apple is grown locally, but that is we can imagine that. Those might both be sugars, but it's a different kind of sugar. And then local is important because of climate, because plants growing draw down carbon dioxide. And if you have healthy soil and you have good plants, those roots are going deep, 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 deep in the soil. And as they go deep and then the roots break off and die, they're adding carbon to the soil. It's a way that carbon is taken out of the atmosphere and into the soil. It's really powerful when you realize that, technologically we're thinking about carbon capture and storage, and we're thinking about technological solutions to climate change. But in fact, no-till, low-till organic practices farming actually sequesters carbon dioxide naturally. It's not that carbon dioxide is bad, it's just in the wrong place. And also because there's a shorter distance from farm to table, the miles that the food that we are eating travel is probably at most 50. Okay. I'm going to skip this one because I think I talked about that before. And then the other one is depolarization. Excuse me. We'd be on Friends of Food and Farming. It's a Facebook group, or I go on, we'd be backyard gardeners. And I don't know the politics of the people, who are saying like, we have 50 chickens. Does anybody want them? Or, have you seen this kind of leaf on a plant? What does that indicate? Or, I have a piece of farm equipment. We don't talk politics. We don't know that. There's across the entire political spectrum, people value growing food in their yards, value local food, value sovereignty, freedom, nourishment, community. We all value that. And so in a way, it's through the local food system, whether it's our farms, et cetera, or whether it's our backyards, through that system, we knit ourselves together as a community. We may be encouraged through the media to think of people as the other, which is a dangerous thought because we're all here together on the rock, but it's through this knitting together, through food, farming, growing, learning, through mutual aid, that we stitch ourselves together. So I've just spent all of this time telling you why local food is important, so that we take it out of the category of a sort of fun thing to do on a Saturday. And I wanted us to see deeper into how the system works and what value it brings to us. And so that we can, as we now shop our local food system, as we shop our farmers markets and farm stands, et cetera, we realize that there's more to it than just the broccoli. And so this is another one. Everyone eats, everyone has a role in the relational eating shift. So now we're going to go into talking about some of the places where you can buy local food. Put in the chat, I'm going to mention some places. These are pretty dense, information dense slides, but I'll talk you through them. But if you have other sources of local food that I haven't mentioned, please put it in the slide. Or, I mean, I haven't put in restaurants, et cetera, but, you might, if there's a restaurant you go to and they use local berries or, local lettuce or whatever it is they use. I know Gordon's on Blueberry Hill has a certain focus on local food. Orchard Kitchen has farm to table. The farm is right there, if you know it, and it's in Bayview. So any places that that you love, where you have a local food experience, you can just put them in the chat. So the Whidbey Island Grown Cooperative it has been developed since I did my 10-mile diet. At that time, we really realized that we needed some way, some marketplace that people didn't have to go to 5 farm stands, because this one has the turnips this week and this one has the asparagus. They didn't have to go to 5 farm stands. There could be a one-stop shopping. And so we have this 40 local producers list their products in an online marketplace. As I said earlier, the links for this are going to all be up on my website fairly soon as humanly possible. So you can get the link and you can go to the page to order the food from the Whidbey Island Cooperative. And you just scroll and scroll and scroll. There are meats, there are pastas, there are jellies and jams and sauces. There are every different kind of vegetable, fruit. So you go there and you realize I could shop for the week here. There's seeds and greens, veggies. So there's the list, prepared foods. Yeah, there's so much. Some of my favorite bread is listed on there. There's 2 wonderful bakers on South Whidbey that I know of. So farmers and bakers and fermenters and cooks and makers from Whidbey Island, Skagit, San Juan, and Whatcom counties all list on this Whidbey Island Grown Cooperative. Oops. So support local agriculture to preserve our rural heritage, build resilience in our community. That's one of their taglines. So that's Whidbey Island Grown Cooperative. Then we have local farm stands and stores. I'm not going to go through all the specific ones on this, but this is the WhidbeyFarmstands.com brochure that is produced by Goosefoot, goosefoot.org. And so years ago, when I was working on this, and there was a group of us that started Whidbey Island Friends of Food and Farming, we said there's got to be a way that people don't have to go to the farmers market on Saturday to get their local food if they miss it, or Sunday if they miss it, it's over. There's got to be a way to have everyday local food. I call it ELF, and we realized, well, there is, because there's farm stands. And so Goosefoot started producing this farm stand brochure at that time. And now you can get the brochure, download it from WhidbeyFarmstands.com, and you will have it. And you can have it tucked in your glove box, and you can go around and you can discover that some farmers are really, some different farmers produce different products, and that you can cruise around and pick up what you need. Oh, we have some chats here. Let's see. Has anybody got other food stamps to be used at farmers markets? Yeah, thank you. Has the Whidbey Co-op looked into the possibility of making their food accessible in that way? I do not know. But that's a really good point. I know that it's easier. I know there's an easier way at farmers markets to buy food with food stamps. And this is a really wonderful development that then, because for people of lower incomes, like scrambling to get a filling meal is difficult. And if you go to the grocery store and you compare, like, you could get a loaf of bread for what you might pay for one head of broccoli, the tendency is to get the loaf of bread. And you could talk about nutrient density all you want, but you want to fill your stomach. So that with food stamps, being able to, you can pay for some of your farmers market food with food stamps is very beneficial, because then the broccoli and the bread is on a par. And then if you can get some recipes and learn how to cook it, that's another thing. Is one of the big challenges is people don't know how to cook. We've forgotten because we're hurried and it's Pop-Tarts in the morning and frozen pizza at night. And thank you for dropping in the Would-Be Farm Stands link. And then this is community supported agriculture. And these are subscription services that you participate in the risk and reward with the farmer. You pay in advance for a season's worth of food, and the farmer will do his or her very best to grow the best and most bountiful food. And so you participate in the abundance of that harvest. You paying in the beginning allows them to buy their seed and starts and stuff like that, allows them to get the food, get the seeds into the ground. And buy the manure, et cetera, and buy whatever machinery they need to produce that year. And then you get boxes for the entire growing season. And pretty much it's just like a food subscription service now. It's not so much, originally it was more a relational thing where like, okay, I was risking, I'm going to bet on this farmer, but if there's something that happens, if it's too much rain and the crop gets washed out, well, we shared the risk. But this is a subscription service. And so here's a list of the farms that have either fresh sheets or CSAs, community supported agriculture. And this information is thanks to Slow Food, Whidbey Island. And that link is also going to be in the on the page that I developed on my website, because they have put together a very comprehensive, very well-researched list of all the different food sources on the island. And included there is the organic farm school. So we're training here on the island, we're training people to be farmers. And part of that is the training to, run a food stand, a farm stand. So there we go. So shop at the farmer's market. Your farmers are one handshake away from hands in the dirt. Check the chat. Okay, thank you. Oh, you're wonderful, folks. You're dropping those links into the chats. And then there's the farmers markets. And these are the 4 I know of. So if anybody knows of another farmers market that we should know about, please drop that in the chat. Oak Harbor Farmers Markets, the Coopville Farmers Market, South Woodbey Tilth Farmers Market, that's Sundays, and Bayview on Saturdays. We used to have a Langley one, but I don't know if it's happening this year. So, but I can look into that, include that on the, somebody's responding. South Woodbey Tilth is open 11 to 3. Oh, and what did I say on that one? Okay, so this information is a little old. Hi Prescott. Yeah, South Woodbey Tilth Farmers Market is open 11 to 3 now. And then we even have local seeds. Deep Harvest Farm is producing local seeds. They offer over 150 varieties of certified organic, open pollinated, and non-GMO seeds, all proven to thrive in the Pacific Northwest. And you can buy them. I know at Bayview Farm and Garden, you can buy their seeds. I'm sure there's other places. Also, they sell at Payless. There's a little section there that's their farm product. So we're very, very lucky to have people that are growing seed right here on the island, adapted to our island. So we're even producing seeds, which is really important, because importing seeds is a vulnerability. It's really important that we have local seeds for local production. So now we're going to go to some of the major institutions that are building our food system. There's the Organic Farm School in Max Welton Valley. And they say it's a learning center. And it not only trains new farmers to develop and manage small farms focused on ecological, economic, and social regeneration. And the term regeneration, you may or may not know about it. Okay, I'm checking the link. So regeneration it's like the beyond resilience, beyond sustainability. It's not sustaining things and keeping them as they are, but using practices that can actually return nature to a healthier state. So the regenerative practices build soil, increase fertility, and create communities of life with trees and plants and crops and animals. And so it's building a whole community of life again that will be self-sustaining and self-nourishing. And it's simultaneously offering opportunities for our community and others to learn about their role in strengthening the local food system. They in the summer, they have Friday night pizza parties. It's really wonderful. And they have tours of the farm school, and they have all sorts of ways that you can interact with the farm school. And they take volunteers in all sorts of ways to help them. And then in partnership with the Whidbey Camano Land Trust, they just purchased for $6.5 million, which is the biggest purchase that the Land Trust has done. They bought the Keystone Farm and Forest Preserve. It's 175 acres of forest and 2/3 of a mile of shoreline and cropland. And so the farm school is actually managing the development of that very large farm in Mid-Island. And this would have been gone into development. So this is so important to think about keeping land out of development. And that's the thing I'm thinking about a lot now is it's called affordable housing, I would call it, homes people can afford to live in. And it's like we're going to sprawl or we're going to concentrate. We're going to build more densely in our cities. And then there's the Good Cheer Garden, which is the people on the south end. I don't know how many people from Central or North, but in 2014, it was earlier that Carrie Peterson, who's been one of the great food system creators on the south end, recognized that we could grow a garden at the Good Cheer Food Bank. And volunteers came in, we built the beds, and this is producing beautiful food for the food bank. And then behind the Bayview School, there was an acre of land that was tilled up and developed to grow food for the food bank. So just in Bayview Corner, we have the Big Acre, we have the Good Cheer Food Garden, we have Orchard Kitchen. It's just incredibly rich local food agricultural area. And then we have the school gardens, and that's in 2014. Carrie Peterson started this program, and on land near the in the Max Welton Valley, in the Max Welton School complex, and this for the students to be able to grow food, eat local food, and just have an appreciation of it. And it has grown into a complete K-12 program. Food is integrated into the high school and grade school curriculum and middle school curriculum. The children learn to not only plant, harvest, eat, they learn to cook local food. They developed recipes. And they also share the food from the the gardens with local nonprofits. And they also, this was an interesting story, and it's a story that I learned when I was working in this area. It would make so much sense just to bring in the local food and take it into the kitchen in the high school or grade school and prepare food, school lunches. But there is a company called Chartwells that is the designated supplier of food for the schools. And they have very high standards for what can go into that, what can actually go from a local farm into the school, you know. So Carrie actually worked through all the steps of that. And this is the only school farm that there's only place for the producer that where Chartwells has the contract where we can take the produce from the gardens and put it into the lunches. And then up in Coopville, the purpose of the Coopville Garden is to support learning, inspire creativity, and promote the health of our students. And they plant food and they learn about food, and I think they have a kitchen and they grow food. So it's grown from South Whidbey School Farms to Coopville Farm to School. Yeah, so. And then there's, I am not covering all of the organizations as you saw in that original, you know, that picture that was developed by Goosefit. There's many organizations that are supporting our capacity to feed ourselves from where we live. And Whidbey Island Nourishes, or called WIN, is one of them. It's a program that bridges the gap for those in need. It started to provide food for students who depend on school for them to eat. It provides weekend meals and other nutritional support for children and teens on South Whidbey Island who would otherwise go hungry. Those are all the organizations I've covered. There's many, many more. But then there's Growing Your Own. And so I presume that we have some, yeah, we're very lucky here. When I taught in Maryland, the students weren't permitted to eat the food they helped to grow in the school garden. Right. Thank you. Exactly. And that's very much thanks to Carrie Peterson, who's right here. And what Carrie started doing is she started making videos about growing food, you know, lots of different kinds of videos about how to plant, where to plant, when to plant, and processes, procedures, and, you know, like how to harvest. And she has a YouTube channel, and that will be on the resources page on my website, but it's also here. It's a live link. I don't think we're going to go over to it, but this is Farmer Carrie, and she has, I don't know, 1.5 million viewers. I mean, she's got like so many viewers. She's a star. And then the WSU, Washington State University Extension Program, up in Coopville, connects people in communities of Ione County with a knowledge base of Washington State University to promote quality of life and advance economic well-being. So they have brochures, they have classes, and they run the Master Gardener program. So they have, you know, just about anything you want to grow, they have resources there about how to grow it, when to plant it, etc. And then Anza Munchow, who was actually, I think, one of the first people to imagine that there should be a farm school. She's a longtime farmer, used to farm at Maha Farms. She offers free Zoom classes called Farmer Shadow on the first Tuesday of the month. And this will also be in the resource guide. So, and mostly, you know, she'll teach a little something, but it's a time when if you have garden questions, you can ask Anza at that time. So we have a lot of resources for growing your own. And I'm sure a lot of you are growing food yourselves, you know, whether it's in your backyard or, you know, on your, you know, planters on your deck or however. I'm sure a lot of you are growing food yourself. I just toss that in. That's my garden. And my chicken's back there in the background. And I love it. You know, for me, it's not just the food I get out of it, but it's the beauty and watching the opulence of nature, just, you know, pour love and green and parsnips and tomatoes and carrots, pour it out of the ground. It's just so fulfilling. So this is another one of these. This is Nathaniel. How radical is it really for we the eaters to reclaim our right to eat food grown locally, legally, and economically? And I'll just mention the legally part is that there are barriers to our local food system. And I am not up on the current regulations. The current what's changed in recent times. But the story I remember from when I was working on this was there was a woman named Vicki Brown who had a goat farm. And because she let the school children come to pet the goats, she milked and she had goat milk and goat cheese. Because the kids could come, and they had to build a wheelchair accessible bathroom in this like funky old barn. So that was a big expense for them, a small scale producer. And then she couldn't have the kids coming in anymore because there's regulations about if a school bus goes down a road, it has to be able to have a certain distance, a circle, to turn around and go back out. And because she didn't have any room to have the turnaround, they wouldn't bring the children there anymore. And her farm closed. So these are things we start to see, that there need to be scale appropriate regulations. And of course, the regulatory environment. I mean, so this is one thing that a lot of these regulations have been put into place to protect the quality and non-toxicity of our food. For example, milk, you know, I mean, you have to have pasteurized milk in the grocery store because could be one container could have milk from 1,000 cows. But local farm gate sales of milk to our community should be legal and actually encouraged because it's very nutritious and delicious. And they say, you know, the industrial food system says you need us, number one, because local food is tainted. And it's not completely true because there's plenty of food from the grocery store that's also been tainted and recalled. So it's not a guarantee of untainted food. They say we need it to feed the world, but actually it's been discovered, it's been researched that local food, local farmers, you know, and when you say a local farm, it could be anything from 3 acres to about 200 acres, you know, that local farms feed their community better than the global food system. And also there's so many people going hungry. So there's the global food system. If you take away people's land and make them depend on the global food system, then of course they're more vulnerable. So there's a lot of explanations about why we need to be dependent on that system that actually don't hold water. It's not that raw milk is 1,000% guaranteed to. Yeah. Okay. Gorgeous garden. Thank you, Prescott. I was just checking the chat. Yeah, I mean, everything, there's risk everywhere, but I'm just saying that it's not that the global food system is risk-free and local food, you know, is tainted. So let's take a look at a regional diet, you know, because this talk is to encourage us to actually feast our imagination on the idea that we actually do have the capacity here in the Pacific Northwest to feed ourselves. And we're very lucky to have that. We're very lucky to have that. And so a 10-mile diet is a very extreme experiment to see, to reveal my needs and addictions, et cetera. But if we want to think about shortening the food miles from farm to table, and also if we want to think about resilience, sovereignty, then we should think about that we in Washington State, in our region, are very, very fortunate. So like a 2-hour drive from my house, like if you think about it in expanding rings, within 2 hours, I could get, 2 hours, over 50 miles, probably 75 miles. And in that, 2-hour range, I could probably get all my veggies year round. I could get the summer crops and also winter storage crops, the potatoes and squashes and carrots and parsnips, et cetera, and beets. And so I've actually worked on this to see if how much I can eat locally in the winter. I finished off my potatoes from last year just recently. And then, 100-mile radius, you probably can start to get your meat, like the beef, pork, lambs, et cetera, chickens, turkeys. Surely we can get enough meat. And that's the other thing that I learned with my local food diet is meat is a treat, not as a meal. That, local meat might be more expensive. It's beautiful, but it might be a bit more expensive, but you can just eat half and then it's the same price. So that's one of the principles that I made for myself is local food is if you do meat as a treat and not as a meal, if you're a meat eater. And the other thing about grazing animals, this is one of the things I learned from Fakama Farm, is that we, in our minds, because of industrial scale, livestock production and all the bad side effects from that, the methane production and the injustices, et cetera, we've made eating meat wrong. And but if you eat a locally, if you eat meat as a treat, not as a meal, and you eat locally produced meat that is grown regeneratively, in other words, this rotational grazing, so that there's always getting, good grass to eat. And the poop, the manure fertilizes the soil. It can be and sometimes, there's some pieces of land that are just better for grazing than for crops, and so it's a wonderful way to use all of our land appropriately. Just putting in that plug for how we can think about that meat grown locally, like, Kevin Dunham growing hogs or turkeys, that's a different thing. It's local prosperity for himself and his wife and 2 kids. And it's very different from, bacon you get from the store. And then, in that 100-mile radius, you can probably get, your grains as well. And then there's this thing that I called exotics, the foods from afar that you cannot live without. So it's not saying that we really must, consume only what is local. I just did a 500-mile food shed. I mean, you take a look at that and you see fish, you see grain, you see meat, you see row crops, you see permaculture farms, you see forests, you see orchards, you see food, like processing, there's hazelnuts grown up near the northern border of Washington. I think there's other places too where they make hazelnut oil. So you start to think about, okay, what do I eat on a daily basis and can I get it from my region? And the fact of the matter is that we can. So part of it is we, the eaters, changing our habits and attitudes. And part of it is that we're going to grow the food system through our advocacy and our participation. And then we can have this. So Washington farmers produce over 300 different commodities. If we can't make a diet out of that, I don't know what. And then there's almost 36,000 farms here. There's nearly 900 organic farmers in Washington, nearly 27,000 female farmers. And food processing generated more than $21.8 billion. So it's from the smallest scale, like farm stand up to this. Yes, this is an industrial production, but I'm just saying there is enough, there's sufficiency. So I'll just talk about this game I developed so that other people could have the excruciating and exhilarating experience I had of doing my 10-mile diet. And it's just a suggestion that you could try. You could make a commitment that for 10 days, maybe in September, you would eat food grown within 100 miles of your home. And that would just, it just makes you concentrate on what grows here. And easy peasy, now you've got the food hub, so. And then you give yourself 10 exotics, foods from afar you can't live without. I had 4. And so when you just start to think about what are the foods from afar that you can't live without, whatever it is, one of your Trader Joe, whatever, little prepared something, what are those foods? And a lot of people can't get past 6 when they start to think, what do I eat that I can't live without? And that I can't produce within my 100-mile region. Maybe you like the frozen bagged, French fries, but you can make them. It's easy peasy. So that's one thing that you can do, a game you can play with yourself or with friends to see what really is in your food system and how can you prepare it and batch cook it so that you have a delicious, nutritious diet for just 10 days. And so this is like, we're getting into the home stretch here. What you can do. So buy local, we just went over all those local sources. And get on the mailing list for Fresh Sheets and the Organic Farm School so that you, I don't know if I had a slide about the Fresh Sheets, but some of the farms have Fresh Sheets. It's not a community-supported agriculture. It's just they will mail you a list of what's fresh on the farm, and you mail them back, and you order your food, and then you go and pick it up. They bag it up for you, and you pick it up, and you pay them, and you take it home. And then you can share information through social media and. I said WIF, H. Whidbey Island Friends of Food and Farming was an organization that just helps people connect around food and farming. And then Whidbey Backyard Gardeners, Gardeners, is a wonderful, wonderful Facebook group. And then also, there's all this, food porn, the people taking pictures of their food. One thing you can do is if you cook something that's local, take a picture, post it on Facebook or Instagram or, Snapchat or, whatever it is. Maybe you'll start to be a local food star on TikTok. Just take a picture. So basically you can increase the participation in our local food system by showing people what you're doing. Grow your own. And then this final one is jumping over to my current hobby horse about the lack of homes you can afford for what we used to call essential workers. And I don't need to go into all the dynamics of the marketplace, but you can think about if there is a part of your home that you never use, like the rec room in the basement or the family room or whatever, there's a part of your home that you don't use. And perhaps it has a bathroom associated with it so that the person doesn't have to use your bathroom. Perhaps it has a door to the outside. It's not just asking, could you have a farmer as a roommate, which is not a bad idea at all. I've had them and it's great. But you could also have just a little sort of like a separate part of your house where somebody could, have some countertop appliances and be able to have an independent life. being able just to think about it, just think about whether you have surplus space and that you might be able to assign to somebody, some essential worker on the island who needs housing. And that's another way that you can grow the food system, is by housing interns and farm hands. And, food producers and wait staff at restaurants. And, there are a lot of things that make Whidbey Island great that depend on people working in our businesses and having housing. So this is wrap up. The takeaways, you can take away whatever you want, but I just want to leave you with that local food is more nutritious. It's got a lower carbon footprint. It bridges differences. It increases sovereignty, and it creates the beautiful countryside that we live in. And local food provides jobs both for small farmers on their own land and agricultural workers. Local food makes us more secure. It bridges divides, and it isn't as hard as you may have thought. So that is what I wanted to say. And if there, oh, right, some nice little, yeah. So if there's questions that have come up that people have asked a question, then just tell me. And does anybody have a question? Is it Megan? Are you the one who's fielding them?
So it is actually me, Katrina, and you are
getting, hi, Katrina.
You're getting some thanks in the chat, and I will echo that. Thank you very much. This was a wonderful presentation, and really, I think, is getting us thinking about our food system. Do you have any recommendations or advice for people who live in more urban areas and aren't surrounded by the bounty here on Whidbey? Some small things maybe that they could do to eat more locally.
Well, if there's a food co-op where you live, there might be more constant. I know the food co-ops I've been to, they do emphasize local food. Like over in Port Townsend, they basically, I think they have a system, at least they did when the last time I was there, where they charge a little less for local food. So they're supporting growing the food system. So you can look for food co-ops. Almost every city has farmers markets. And also you can look up, on the web, community supported agriculture food, like CSA boxes. Because when I lived in Seattle, we actually were one of the first people to buy a share in a farm. It was like one farm that was doing it 100 years ago. And so there was a drop-off point in the city where we would go and pick up our box every week. So that's CSAs, co-ops, and farmers markets would be the three suggestions.
Thank you. I've heard it said that Washington State has some, if not the most diverse offerings of crops grown of any state in the country. Do you know anything about that and have any insight as to why that is? Like, we just grow a wider variety of things.
I have no insights about why that is, but I'm very glad I live here.
Yeah. And if anyone else in the audience has a question, please pop it in the chat. And I will remind everyone that there were lots of great resources that were shared, links to websites, and those will all be up on Vicki's website in the next couple of days. And we've shared that in the chat a few times, and we can do that again before we close. Someone is recommending for urban folks to check out the Pea Patch if you need space to grow a garden, and public food forests such as the Beacon Food Forest in Seattle. Wonderful. So the Pea Patch is like the community garden where you can rent a little plot and grow your own food.
Yep. So I'm going to stop sharing and get back over here with y'all. Yeah, we don't have to like hit the 8 o'clock mark precisely. We can just, if this is it, I just thank you all for coming, and thank you all who are going to listen to us later for your attention. I hope this has been informative and interesting. Yeah. Okay. So,
In the chat. Yeah. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you.
oh, yeah. Thank you. It was just wonderful to do it.
Absolutely. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Be sure to check out our website for more Whidbey Reads events, as well as the author events with author Eileen Garvin. All right. Thank you all. I'm going to end the webinar now. Have a good night, everyone.